They lived beneath shifting glaciers and open ice age skies. They were not myths or half-humans. They were people, hunters, tool makers, parents, who survived in Eurasia for more than 300,000 years. And then, in a span that barely registers on the prehistoric clock, they were gone. For over a century, researchers have returned to the same question. What ended the Neanderthals? Climate, competition, disease, violence, chance. Each explanation held part of the truth, but none ever fully closed the case, until ancient DNA did. And what it revealed wasn't a dramatic catastrophe or a losing battle. It was something far quieter and far more inevitable. Neanderthals were dying out long before modern humans ever arrived. They were already doomed by their own biology. The answer did not come from a battlefield or a dramatic collapse. It began with fragments, a tooth, a shard of bone, pulled from cold caves in the Altai Mountains of Central Asia, including Denisova and Shagarskaya. For years, those remains sat in museum drawers. Then, new genetic techniques arrived. Collagen became sequences, sediment became data, and inside those sequences, something unsettling appeared. Neanderthals were not just rare at the end. They had been rare for a very long time. High-coverage Neanderthal genomes revealed long stretches of identical DNA on both copies of the same chromosome. This pattern, known as runs of homozygosity, is a genetic signature of small populations, not once, but repeatedly. Across Europe and Western Asia, Vindija in Croatia, Spy in Belgium, Mesmaiskaya in the Caucasus, the same signal appeared. Neanderthal populations were fragmenting into small, isolated groups. Their population tree did not branch outward, it folded inward. Ancient DNA allowed scientists to estimate effective population size, and the numbers were not measured in tens of thousands. They were often measured in low thousands, sometimes lower. That matters because small populations live close to the edge of probability. In tiny groups, chance becomes lethal. Harmful mutations spread more easily. Essential genes can be lost entirely. A single harsh winter, a failed hunt, an injury, or an illness hits harder when there are only a few dozen people sharing a fire. The genetic evidence shows that Neanderthal Y chromosome lineages were unusually uniform. Their mitochondrial DNA, passed down through mothers, narrowed like a river entering a canyon. Even the places they lived tell the same story. Fewer families, shorter occupation layers, kin groups clustered within walking distance of one another. This was not a sudden collapse. It was long-term fragility written into their biology. Then the clock moved. Between roughly 60,000 and 45,000 years ago, modern humans expanded into Neanderthal territory. They moved along coasts, rivers, and open steppe, carrying broader social networks and the ability to exchange ideas, tools, and mates across hundreds of miles. This was not necessarily a story of conquest. We know that because Neanderthal DNA survives today. Most people outside Africa carry between 1% and 2% Neanderthal ancestry. Scattered across living genomes, as much as 20% of the Neanderthal genome survives collectively. But the exchange was asymmetric. Modern human DNA flowed into Neanderthals early on, then slowed almost to nothing. The genetic rescue that could have come from fresh diversity never arrived in time. Meanwhile, Neanderthals remain broken into small islands of population, a valley here, a cave there, each with too few people to buffer the blows of chance. As climate swung again, colder snaps and shifting prey ranges cut deeper into groups already stretched thin. In the laboratory, the evidence mounted. Genomes from multiple sites told the same story in different accents. Long runs of homozygosity, extremely low effective population sizes, close relatives buried near one another. One cave layer even preserved a family cluster. A father, daughter, uncles, cousins, a frozen snapshot of a shrinking society. No massacre appears in the DNA, no single catastrophe. What it shows instead is drift, the slow genetic lottery that small populations almost always lose. Add mild competition for game and shelter from incoming modern humans. Add environmental instability. Add the possibility, still debated, of disease exposure. None of these alone would doom a large, connected population. Together, inside small, isolated groups, they tilt the table irreversibly. Neanderthals lingered in refuges, peninsulas, mountain valleys, pockets of favorable habitat. Fires still burned, children were still born, but the arithmetic never recovered. Losses outpaced births, and the line declined one camp at a time. This is what makes the DNA evidence so devastating. It shows that Neanderthals were already on borrowed time. Their population structure had been fragmenting for tens of thousands of years. By the time modern humans arrived with their larger, interconnected populations, the outcome was mathematically inevitable. It wasn't a question of if Neanderthals would disappear. It was only a question of when. The genetic record preserves this decline in brutal detail. At Vindiga Cave in Croatia, Neanderthal remains dated to approximately 50,000 years ago, show extreme inbreeding. At Chagarskaya Cave in Siberia, genetic analysis revealed a community so small that a father and his teenage daughter were buried in the same occupation layer. At Mezmaiskaya in the Caucasus, mitochondrial DNA sequences are so similar across individuals separated by thousands of years that researchers initially thought they had contamination. They didn't. They had evidence of a population that never expanded. Compare this to modern human populations, expanding into the same regions during the same time periods. Their genetic diversity was orders of magnitude higher. Their social networks spanned hundreds of kilometers. Their ability to form alliances, share resources, and exchange mates across vast distances meant they could weather the same environmental pressures that were breaking Neanderthal populations apart. This is not a story about intelligence or capability. Neanderthals were sophisticated hunters. They controlled fire, created complex tools, cared for their injured and elderly, and adapted to some of the harshest environments on Earth. They survived ice ages that would have killed most modern humans. But they survived in small, isolated groups, and in evolutionary terms, that is a death sentence written in slow motion. When modern humans arrived, they didn't need to wage war. They didn't need to outcompete Neanderthals for every resource. They simply needed to exist in larger, more connected groups. The demographic advantage was overwhelming. Modern humans could absorb losses that would cripple a Neanderthal band. They could recover from disasters. That would end a valley population. They could exchange innovations that Neanderthals, isolated in their separate refuges, could not. The interbreeding that occurred between the two populations tells this story from another angle. Modern humans absorbed Neanderthal DNA and carried it forward into expanding populations. But Neanderthals could not do the reverse. Their populations were too small, too isolated, too genetically constrained to benefit from the genetic diversity modern humans could have provided. The rescue never came. By 40,000 years ago, Neanderthal populations had contracted to a handful of final refuges. The genetic evidence shows these last populations were even more inbred, even more isolated than those that came before. They were the end of a long, slow decline that had been written in their DNA for millennia. Neanderthals did not vanish because they were primitive. They did not fail because they were slow or inferior. They fell because demography is unforgiving. Small populations roll loaded dice. When modern humans arrived with wider networks and larger gene pools, the contrast became decisive. Survival favored the many, not the isolated. Ancient DNA did not give us a villain. It gave us a cause. And it gave us a warning, written not in legend but in base pairs, of how quietly a human lineage can end when the numbers grow too small. The Neanderthals were not destroyed. They faded, one small group at a time, victims of mathematics they could not escape. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy how genetics is rewriting what we thought we knew about human extinction, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next discovery. This is Hidden Strata,